Well, we're going to get into the study of Esther chapter 4 tonight. Okay, what did Esther look like? And what was that story like? And I thought I'd just review this a little. I got on, you can get on the internet, and I'll tell you, some of the things you find on there, people have imaginations that really go wild when it comes to, and especially when it comes to the Bible. They've got so much stuff. This little cartoon captured it as well as any, and I thought, well, I'll just use that. Some things about Esther that are so admirable. And ladies, this is what you need to think of Esther. Now, Esther is not a role model for everything, but in some areas she is. And one thing, God had blessed her with being very beautiful. And I know a lot of times we think beauty, well, that's how you look. And that is certainly part of it, but I'll tell you that's only a little part of it. There were some other things about Esther that made her beautiful, and I'm going to suggest there's a second trait, and that was her modesty. Now, you don't read about, I'm not talking about her indecency or modesty compared to indecency here, but just her demeanor. When you read about Esther, she comes across as a modest kind of woman. She's not really the one that's trying to be out there all the time. And that probably added to the fact that made her so attractive. Not just how she looked, but who she was. We read over in 1 Peter, I think it's chapter 4, how the meek and quiet spirit is in the sight of God of great price. Meekness, that's one that's not afraid in time of trouble. It keeps a calm spirit in manner of turmoil. That's what meekness is, one that's in control of their faculties. And then quietness, well, that doesn't mean they don't say anything. That's not what quietness means. That has to do with the whole demeanor of a person. And it's very similar to this idea of modesty. And so that made her attractive as well. But I'll tell you something else about Esther. She is very wise. Watch how she uses her wits in this to think herself through this and to get her people out of trouble. She never takes a misstep in this whole story because she is wise. And then the other thing that we're going to see tonight, she is courageous. You take a woman that is attractive, that is modest, that is wise, and that is courageous, and you have a very powerful woman there. You're going to see in this part of the story, see, Esther's raised by Mordecai, her cousin. And she always did what her cousin told her. He must have been an older cousin and took Esther in after her mother and father died. But then, as this story develops, you can see Esther she comes more and more on her own. And by the time we get to the end of the book of Esther, she's running the whole show. And she's the one telling Mordecai what he needs to do. And she doesn't do it by stepping out and says, now I'm the queen, I have authority to do this. No, people are able to respond to Esther and to obey her because they recognize the quality of person she is and the wisdom she has. And I get to thinking, Esther knows what she's talking about. We better do what Esther says. And so that's how she rises to power all the way through this story. So there's a lot there to consider and think. Don't you wish, I heard Mike's prayer, don't you wish our leaders in our country knew their Bibles? Don't you wish they had Bible studies? I wonder how many of them really think that it's important for them to know what the Scriptures say. And there was a time, I think our leaders did. I've read some of the old speeches, the senators and the presidents, and that was back before they had speech writers. And what they said was filled with Scripture. And it's not so much they're just necessarily quoting verses. Well, even Abraham Lincoln, when he stood up at Gettysburg and started off this way. He said, 77 years ago. Well, now, you don't find that in the Bible, but you read about years counted in scores in the Scripture, don't you? Well, the Bible was just so much a part of the thinking of our leaders in the past. Don't you wish you could hear that today? You hear our president, or you hear some senator, you hear some congressman talk, and you think, well, you know, that sounds like he's been reading his Bible. And when I hear them talk, I don't think they've been reading their Bible. It just doesn't sound like anything. If they are, they're reading some modern version that I'm not familiar with. And so I wish they knew their Bibles. Well, we need to know our Bibles. And so I just am so thrilled to be here with you all tonight for a period of Bible study and learn this part of the book of Esther. Now let's go. Here we are. We got memory work, and that's in this chapter, and this is a key verse. So let's look at this. In fact, this is what I would call the key verse of the book of Esther. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall there enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come into the kingdom for such a time as this? Okay, we got to know the whole verse, but that last part, who knoweth whether thou art come into the kingdom for such a time as this? It may be the reason you're here at this time is to serve God's purpose, some particular purpose. How would you know? Well, you don't know, but you know what to do. Just do what God says, and God will find ways to work everything out. The next memory verse, these two are related, Romans 10:17. Faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. And Luke 8 and verse 12, which relates to this a little bit, because talking about the parable of the sower, those by the wayside are they that hear. Then cometh the devil and taketh away the word out of their hearts, lest they should believe and be saved. Look what he says in the parable of the sower. You hear and you believe, and then you're saved. You got to have the Word of God. I was listening to Tom Holland on the radio on the way to worship tonight on one of the stations here in town, and he was talking about how powerful God's Word is. That you can sit down with an agnostic and study the Bible. He sat down with one. They started studying the Bible, and after a few studies, he heard him stand up before that entire church where he preached and said, I believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. How did he get that faith? Because of what he heard in the Word. And so those are our memory verses. Now let's get into the Esther chapter tonight. As we do, we're going to begin with the last part of chapter 3. I want you to know what the king and Haman were doing after the king had sent that decree out that all of the Jews would be killed in his kingdom in one day. At the instigation of Haman, it says the king and Haman sat down to drink. But the city of Shushan was perplexed. You see that great contrast? That king in his palace had no idea of the grief that was scattered throughout that kingdom, and probably didn't even care. They just sit down, well, let's have a drink. And yet, all across his kingdom, and particularly there in Shushan, they are perplexed. So now let's go to Esther chapter 4. When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth with ashes. You ever seen someone so upset they tear their clothes? Well, I think I've seen that. Just so upset, just jerk their shirt. I've seen people angry enough where they do some foolish things. People take their hand and hit a wall. Well, it didn't do their hand any good. They may put a hole in the wall, but just a way of expressing emotion then was to tear their garments and then put on sackcloth. During the Depression, people were taking flour sacks and making clothes out of them for their children and then for themselves. And some of the flour companies got wise and started printing patterns on their flour sacks so people could use those patterns to make clothes. Some of you are laughing. Did you wear some of those flour sacks? clothes? Is that what you're laughing about? Okay. All right, well, I've seen pictures of it. And anyway, they print patterns so that people could make clothes out of their sacks. Well, that's sort of like what sackcloth was. It wasn't expensive cloth. It's probably old burlap something, but that's what they'd put on for mourning. We have our customs of mourning. We don't put ashes on our head, but a lot of the times we'll wear black for mourning, won't we? It's kind of the universal color for mourning. Wear black. There was a time when ladies would veil themselves in time of mourning, so you couldn't see the grief on their face. Or another thing, sometimes people wear sunglasses when they're mourning, maybe so people don't see their tears, And I don't know if that's really a sign of mourning, the sunglasses is, but the black is. And so their custom was to put on these old pitiful garments and then put ashes on their head and just to express that mourning. And then just hear this, Mordecai went out in the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. And you can just almost hear that, can't you? Poor Mordecai out there weeping and wailing. And they came before the king's gate. None might enter into the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. And in every province, wherever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was great mourning among the Jews, and fasting, and weeping, and wailing. And many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Esther's maids and her chamberlain came and told her. Then was the king exceedingly grieved, and she sent raiment to clothe Mordecai and to take away his sackcloth from him, but he received it not. Well, the queen is grieved. The queen doesn't know what she's grieved about. She does not know why Mordecai is out there weeping. So she sends him some clothes. Well, it's not because he doesn't have good clothes. That's not the reason. But there was something she's sending him, saying, I'm here to comfort you. But he wouldn't receive that. Well, he's going to continue mourning. And here she is, the queen, in that palace, and probably in the palace, they don't know what's going on outside those gates. The mourners can't even come through the gates. And someone must have known among her maids that said, there's a relationship of some kind between Esther and Mordecai. She needs to know this. And so they told her, and it grieved her. I've got written in my Bible in the margin here, Romans 12:15. Where it says, weep with those who weep. She didn't have to know why Mordecai was grieving to be grieved. It was enough to know that Mordecai was grieved. And that's the way it is among us, isn't it? When you love people and someone's upset, even if you don't know why, you're upset about that. They're upset. And that bothers you because you love them. And we love one another. I think about Jesus at the tomb of Lazarus, and I've heard all kinds of things about, Jesus wept. And they said, well, why would he weep? He knew he was going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Why would he weep? Well, I tell you what, Mary and Martha were weeping. And he loved them. And he saw their grief, and he just picked right up on it. I was talking to a little class this morning. Sometime I thought, somebody so-and-so's at the funeral home. I need to go down there. And I wasn't particularly emotional about it at all. I just thought, I really need to just go to the funeral home and sign the book and pay a visit. But this one lady, I think it's kind of fun, this one lady that knew my father very well, and she had trouble getting out, and she didn't always want to go to the funeral home. She'd call him and says, when you're down there, sign that book for me. Well, that wasn't the point of it, but she wanted them to know she was part of that. Well, I've gone in the funeral home, and no sooner I get in there and see these people I love weeping, and I'm just weeping with them, just because they're weeping. And that's a human trait. I'll tell you why we do that. It's because we're made in the image of God. And we have a spirit. And it responds in the way God responds. And you can be sure as Jesus is weeping at the grave of Lazarus, because Mary and Martha was, when we're grieving, He's right there with us. He loves us. He knows. Well, she's sending these clothes. Verse 5. Then called Esther for Hatach. Now, Hatach is a little-known character in the Bible, but we're going to read a lot about him right here. He's a messenger that carries a message back and forth. Esther and Mordecai don't get to see each other, but they've got this messenger running back and forth, and he's carrying the message, and he does his job well in this story. They called Hatach, one of the king's chamberlains, whom he had appointed to attend upon her, and gave him a commandment to Mordecai to know what it was and why it was. So Hatach went forth to Mordecai into the street of the city, which was before the king's gate. And Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the Jews to destroy them. Remember, that was 10,000 talents. Okay? And verse 8, and also gave him a copy of the writing of the decree that was given at Shushan to destroy them, and show it unto Esther, and declare unto her, and to charge her that she should go in to the king, to make supplication unto him, and to make request before him for her people. Look how Mordecai is telling Esther what to do. It's what you need to do, Esther. So you're in a position to do. You've got to do something about this. You go to the king and ask him about this. This writing, that king's decree copied and copied and copied and sent all over the province. I just think one of these days somebody's going to find that. You know, these archaeologists always digging something up, aren't they? And they find some clay tablet, or they find some plate, and there'll be some writing on it, and one of these days, I wonder if they're going to find that writing. You know, I bet they will someday. Maybe they're all destroyed. They don't have to find that writing for me to believe Esther. But it always seems to me like when the critics really start bearing down on something, that all of a sudden they come up with the evidence that, well, look at here, it's out here just like the Bible said, and they might find it one of these days. They found other things like that out there. Well, Esther 4 and verse 9. And Hatach came and told Esther the words of Mordecai. And Esther spake unto Hatach, and gave him commandment unto Mordecai. And the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do know that whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come into the king, into the inner court, who is not called, there is one law of his, to put him to death, except to such to whom the king shall hold out the gold scepter, that he may live. But I've not been called to come into the king these 30 days. King hadn't been calling me lately. And you know what the law is? You just walk into the inner court and see the king on your own, and the law is they put you to death. Unless he holds out his scepter. And there's no guarantee he's going to do that. You know, Ahasuerus seemed like kind of a moody king here anyway. He just may not be in a good mood that day and not hold out that scepter. I would also imagine, it's hard to see the president, isn't it? I mean, you go to Washington and you walk up in the White House, and first you won't get up, you won't even be able to knock on the door. They won't even let you over there unless you got some kind of ticket and permit and a congressman vouch for you, and you get up. And then you say, well, I want to see the president. And you're not going to do that. And Elvis Presley did that once with Richard Nixon. Remember that? He just walked right up there, and Richard Nixon let him on in. And so they make a big deal of Elvis Presley visiting Richard Nixon uninvited, just walked up, and the president asked him right in. But Donald Trump's probably not going to see you if you go to Washington. Can you imagine being king of all that provinces and all the people that love to see that king and say something to him? And he probably just got tired of it one day and said, look, anybody else try this, just put them to death. I don't want to see that anymore. And so you go through emissaries and all, and there'd be a procedure to go see the king, and you don't just walk in on him. But Esther was going to do it. Now watch. And they told Mordecai Esther's words. And Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. Esther, they put all the Jews to death. You're going to get put to death too, you know. Don't think you're going to escape. Not only that, for if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come into the kingdom for such a time as this? That word enlargement. You ever thought, I just need a little space. I just need a little room. And that's kind of the idea here. This enlargement is to open this up so they can deal with this. Right now, the Jews are just simply sitting there as victims of all this. A little enlargement and then deliverance needs to come to them. But Esther, that's what you're going to have to do. You've got to go into the king. And at the risk of her life, she's going to have to do that. And how do you know? Maybe that's why you're in the kingdom for such a time as this. So, Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. Go gather all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me. Neither eat nor drink these days or nights. I also and my maidens will fast likewise. So I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. Fast ye for me. I want you to remember, God is not mentioned in the book of Esther. There's no direct reference to God. But what's this fasting all about? In the Bible, fasting is associated with prayer. It's as though the person that writes this is deliberately keeping God in the background and God in the shadows. But if you look, God's in every page, in every verse, in every chapter. This is a story about God's providence. He's the main character. But He's not going to confront that with you directly. It's an ingenious way in which the writer here tells this story. And this fasting, when she's saying, fast ye for me, we know what that means, don't we? It's fasting and prayer. What good would it do to go without food unless they were praying for her and expected God somehow to be involved in this story? So that's why they're fasting. Fast ye for me. And then here's her courage. And if I perish, I perish. You know, there comes a time when you realize, I've just got to do what's right, regardless of the consequences. Now the devil, he can fool you. He can make you think doing right would be the wrong thing to do. So you need to do wrong this time if you're going to do right. And listen to this. Listen. It is always right to do what's right. And it's always wrong to do what's wrong. And it's never right to do what's wrong. And it's never wrong to do what's right. And that's right because the Bible is right. What if Esther had perished? What if she'd caught the king in a bad mood and she walks in, he's not even going to look, I don't even want to see who it is. I'm not going to hold my scepter out. And she's put to death. What if that had happened? Well, we know there's things more important than living, don't we? I mean, there's an eternity there that we are living for. I've heard it said one time, and it's true. If a man doesn't have something worth dying for, he really doesn't have something worth living for. And so Esther was resolved. And that's where she shows her courage. She knows what she needs to do. And she's going to do it in spite of the consequences. So Mordecai went his way. Now look what he did. He did all that Esther had commanded him. You see how Esther is rising in this story? And if she shows her maturity and her wisdom and her courage, then people start following her and she becomes a great influence. People talk about women's role in the church. Women do not occupy positions of authority in God's church. Now they don't. Now somebody, if you submit names for elders back in the box, now you might write down the name of a woman and put it back there. I don't care what a fine woman she is, she's not going to be one of the elders of this church. Because God does not assign women positions of authority. But I tell you what He does do. He gives women great influence over what happens in the church. And a wise, modest woman will know how to use that influence for good without being in a position of authority. And that's what Esther is doing here. Few things. We talked about Romans 12:15, about weep with them that weep, how Esther had wept with Mordecai. Another lesson, though, is Philippians 15. Philemon 15. Philemon the master and Onesimus the runaway slave, and Paul writing the letter to Philemon saying, you need to accept Onesimus back. Listen, he came to me and he's a Christian now, and you're not going to receive him just as a slave but as a brother. And all this worked out so well. And look what Paul said, for perhaps he therefore departed for a season that thou shouldest receive him forever. When it comes to the providence of God, even the Apostle Paul had the modesty to say perhaps. And that's what we need to do. We don't know just how God works all things out. We sing that song, He moves in a mysterious way His wonders to perform. But perhaps this has happened this way, so that these things can be accomplished. Who knows whether thou art come into the kingdom for such a time as this? And then this. Proverbs 3:27 says, withhold not good from them to whom it is due, when it is in the power of thine hand to do it. In the New Testament, we read, therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin. See, Esther knew what she had to do. It would have been wrong for Esther to have refused, because it was within her power to do something about this. There's two different kinds of sins. There's sins of commission, and I guess that's what we usually think of. Boy, he did something wrong, and so that's a sin of commission. But there's another sin that's more sneaky, and sometimes we don't always recognize and maybe even dismiss among ourselves, but they're sins of omission. God doesn't want us to just not do wrong. He wants us to do what's right. And to fail to do what's right is just as much sin as it is to do what is wrong. And that's one of the lessons that we need to learn from Esther. So, that got us through tonight, and I've ordered a new monitor. It's supposed to be coming this week, so maybe we'll have this thing fixed later, and I won't have to worry about doing too much technology up here and stick with my teaching. And Jesus came to John the Baptist to be baptized of him. John didn't want to do it. See, he knew Jesus had no sin. John's baptizing for the remission of sins. They came to John being baptized in Jordan, confessing their sins, and then here's Jesus shows up. John says, I have need to be baptized of thee. And Jesus said, suffer it to be so now, for thus it becometh Christ to fulfill all righteousness. Now suffer it, that means you need to allow this. And now means this is an exception. There are people that want to be baptized like Jesus. They think, well, now that I'm saved, I'm going to be baptized. Well, no, that's not what happened with John. He was baptizing with a baptism of repentance for the remission of sins. They weren't baptized because they were saved. They were baptized in order to be saved. Well, what about Jesus? Well, he said, suffer this now. This is an exception. You allow it now, this time. Not from now on, but now. But he also said, thus it becometh Christ to fulfill all righteousness. You see, if you know you need to be baptized and you refuse, that itself is sin. And so don't put this off. You need to do what the Lord said. Be baptized for the remission of your sins. And the blood of Christ washes those sins away. And who knows? Maybe that's why you're here tonight. Maybe that's why I preach this particular lesson at this particular time. And that's why you're here. So you can decide to do that. And go ahead and take care of that. So if you will, we're going to sing the invitation as we sing this song.